it went downhill from there. So, but I'm not going to sit here and say that, and believe me, if anything ever happens to someone that's close to you, you will go through a process of looking at a couple different things. One, how much of it was the person's responsibility? They either weren't taking as good a care of themselves, they could have been better, and it was just the nature of their health that led to their demise. Number two, was it the medical decisions that were made? Or three, do you blame yourself? What could you have done better? And believe me, I've gone through and I go down those three rabbit holes on a day-to-day basis just about. And nothing changed the outcome. It's in the past. I can't change the past. But what I can do is learn from it, adapt, which is what we humans do, and make decisions moving forward. But I think in this market, if you're a potential patient, and all of us are, we have to be intimately concerned about the nature of what's going on with that hospital, the way it's being run, the wait times, the staff turnover, the shortages, the quality of service, the services available. And you have to be concerned about it. So I think the treasurer has a serious concern. I think the county looked at offloading a responsibility. They didn't really have any options, but they gave a lot of money in the process too. And then you've got to be very concerned. Novant's trying to do damage control and manage either expectations or manage the public's view of them. And then you look at all of that, and then you've got this allegation by WHQR who did, it was essentially involving Francis Weller's sister, I think Margaret Stargell, Willie Stargell's widow, I believe. Yep. Anyway, so a $50 million bribe allegation that there's no history of her lying or misrepresenting truth. And we certainly are well aware of Julia Bozeman's problems. Challenges. What's bizarre is those problems existed long ago in a galaxy far, far away known as, Wilmington. When she was a senator, she was on the stand discussing the train wreck that was her life, her professional and personal life. And then she somehow, because Wilmington loves to elect very colorful folks, gets her into the county commission to run it. And it's a train wreck. It's an absolute train wreck with her and assertions of allegations of using clients' money and not providing services. She's in Italy when they basically have a bench warrant for her arrest. She doesn't worry about that because it doesn't apply to her. And then she comes back, gets out of it completely, doesn't serve 1 minute in jail and says, it's just a misunderstanding. Well, it's clearly not. And now we've got an allegation of bribery. And this is corruption at the highest level when you're going to take, taxpayer money from New Hanover County and allegedly pay somebody off to not speak ill about Novant. That's unbelievable. And it's unfathomable. And there should be many more headlines. I can't believe this story isn't like the day-to-day grind.
Well, it's not quite as bombastic as, there weren't any federal top secret papers involved. But $50 million in our community is a pretty significant amount of money to be throwing around, but bigger still.
Especially because it's not providing a service to the citizens in any measurable way. Right. There's nothing that's being provided with the allegation of the $50 million, and she would have had to have votes, and they would have had to have been slid into the budget. I don't even know how she would have pulled that off. But there's two people that are alleged to be involved in that. So we'll see. I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's not going to be pretty. It shouldn't be pretty. It should be very, very ugly. It should be a lesson. It should be a cautionary tale that goes into Brunswick and Pender and Topsail about insiders doing inside deals and the nature of the way that plays out politically. Because sometimes people get way too comfortable in office. And once they get too comfortable in office, it's one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a republic. And it doesn't just happen in New Hanover County. It happens in Brunswick. It happens in Pender. It happens in the entire market and across the state.
And it, now, was there a change of staff? I mean, I know a couple of smaller businesses.
It's a handshake. Look, we took over. And Novant, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there was a riff of some type because why would you need two massive administrations in both the Novant hospital? But again, I'm not the expert on insider mechanizations of a Novant. I'm not going to pretend to be, but there are questions about the role of the administration in running that hospital. They had a big opening, all this, balloons and all this stuff outside the hospital. Look, Novant, they did a big commercial campaign out there. Hey, come check us out. We're Novant. No, we're not. But, that's putting lipstick on a torn poster. It is not, I would argue, and I think most people in the market would, it is not better than it was. That's the problem with this. It's hard to believe that a county-run hospital, the argument could be made that the county-run hospital is better than the privately run one. But in this case, again, it may be the case, and it's spent a lot of time buying up doctors. More and more doctors are not in private practice. They're basically owned, operated, and run by these hospital cartels across the
that
state.
incentive is the insurance, though, that the insurance.
Sure.
Yeah, the
Because we've
hospital will pick
got
up
a
the insurance.
ridiculously litigious society with
yeah.
no limits on malpractice, and it makes being a doctor very, very challenging. And not only does being a doctor very challenging from a malpractice standpoint, so you get the protection of the hospital, it's also very challenging from a paperwork standpoint. The paperwork that goes into running a hospital or a doctor's office or anything in medicine today is absurd. I can understand why Wilmington Health just takes, hey, pay us now. You pay when services are rendered. But the prices at Wilmington Health are about, a third of what, or maybe less than that, maybe a fifth or a tenth of what they would be with almost anything else. I can't even believe, when you compare a Wilmington Health with Novant, and I wish I could remember the other one, but there's another one that's very popular in the area. Wilmington Health. No, not well. Medic is another one. I don't know the situation with Medic, but it's just south of Wilmington. There's a big office in Leland area. They're quite ortho, something.
I thought they made like bug killer, weed killer.
Yeah, you're thinking of a different kind of ortho. But anyway, it's not Wilmington Ortho, but it's I can't remember the name. But anyway, they are a large group and they are very, very expensive. I mean, I couldn't believe it. So at the time, I had to have two things checked out. I had to have my heart checked out because I had high cholesterol for 1,000 years and have had. And then I had a finger that had, had trouble bending. And so you go to Wilmington Health and they do an MRI of my heart. They pick up the liver just accidentally and some gallbladder, some other organs. And they do have two doctors review it. My total cost out of pocket, no insurance, by the way, was $125. Now, that's a heart MRI with two doctors reviewing it and a report on the liver. Everything was great. My heart was, this is, again, everyone telling you cholesterol is horrible for you. Mine apparently had no effect on my heart whatsoever. It's heart caltex, but that's a different story. But $125. And then I at Emerge Ortho, I think it's Emerge Ortho.
Yeah.
And, one shot, I spent less than 3-4 minutes with the doctor, one cortisone lidocaine shot in my finger, painful as hell, and it was $500. And so I'm like, wait, I had Wilmington Ortho, I pay cash, but on the other one was an insurance claim and paperwork and everything else, but Wilmington Health, no, none of that. And it was instantly, poof, done. So, we have problems. A lot of them are systemic. A lot of them are bureaucratic. We are getting further and further away from healthcare in a timely manner, and we're moving more and more into a government / bureaucracy nightmare. And again, the more government gets involved in anything, the worse it gets. And I can remember a scene where it was The Sopranos years ago.
But you just gave the opposite, as in Novant versus the county. The county was doing a better job than the private Novant.
Well, you would call it a nonprofit hospital. So I like competition.
Then they can't get mad at losing money.
Well, they weren't losing money. They had money, hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank. They were doing fine. It was well run. They had a local board. It was doing quite well. So, and again, I'm not going to pretend to be a hospital expert. I work, part of one of the jobs I do is with Indus Health. We take patients to Costa Rica, to Cahoon, to Cleveland Clinic, to Boston Children's Hospital. We do this at about half to a fifth the cost, including plane fares and hotels and being treated with 5-star service and taking your spouse with you. So we do that for self-insured companies. And we save millions of dollars because the bureaucracies here are absurd. And we're not working with the best interest of the patient. And here's where we get into partisan politics. The political left believes that the best solution to everything is always government involvement. So you get more government in there, you make healthcare a right. And just imagine how little healthcare we'll have if the government takes it over completely. You'd argue that other countries do it so well, but what will happen is, when you get to a certain age, the government will just say, well, you're not fitting into our chart very well, so sorry, but you're 70, you can't get any replacement.
I'm thinking of healthcare done in a judicial court circuit type of format.
Then you'll never get healthcare.
Right, that's the whole thing.
You'll never get healthcare. You'll be lined up, you'll wait 6 months, and your cancer will kill you by the time you get treatment. So you get into a private sector way of doing things, but you need to get insurance is a problem because of health insurance. We have no idea what the cost of healthcare actually is as individuals. I'm not putting anybody in particular down, but you don't. You just have no idea, because between insurance, Medicaid, and Medicare, you have no earthly idea the cost of healthcare in our country today. No, until you go to a cash and a lot of hospitals won't even take cash, or you wish they would, but they like to go through healthcare. Do you have healthcare? Do you have insurance?
That's one of the first questions.
Yes. And
not are you uncomfortable? Are you unconscious? Are you bleeding profusely from the back of your head? Hey, who's your insurance? That's
what I'm doing stuff with Indus, and you're familiar with that company because you and I have talked about that.
I like their logo.
Yeah. And so with that, the first question is always, what is your problem? How can we help you? Every decision that is made in that process is for the patient. In fact, the nurses that we hire at Indus they work for the patient. They don't work for a hospital. They don't work for a doctor. They work for the patient. How much more comfortable can we make you? Can we get you anything? We'll take care of your medical records. We'll put them in front of a doctor. We'll give you the cell number to a doctor. You can speak to your doctor.
You just worry about getting better.
All you have to focus on is getting better. And it's state-of-the-art facilities. I love the narcissism of American hospitals, which is, well, we're better than everybody else. No, actually, your infection rates are worse. Your care is not necessarily better. There are great doctors in this country, and there are good hospitals. The problem is you, as a consumer, have no idea the relative safety of the hospital you're going to. How would you know? What are you going to do? Go to Consumer Reports? No, you have no idea. We have no idea the relative safety, infection rates, and track record of the hospitals that we trust our loved ones' lives to and our own. And that's alarming. That should be scary to anyone. When you go into a restaurant, we have more knowledge about the relative safety of a restaurant that we eat at, including fast food, than we do the hospitals that we choose to get served in. Because when you walk in that restaurant, you see the sanitation grade. You see that. And government can only make it worse. That's minimal government involvement. But when the government crawls in, I mentioned The Sopranos a second ago, there was a scene where a guy just got in trouble. He owed certain people money. And so finally he couldn't pay it off. And so the mob just decides to run his business in the shadows behind him. They're going through his books. They're basically running it behind the scenes. That's what government does. It's running everything. And these healthcare companies, they act like bureaucracies. They're running it. Everything's behind the scenes. And I'll give you an example of Dozier. We're running a little long here, but in Dozier Hospital, a true story, and it's heartbreaking to me because I know this has affected many other people. Dozier Community Hospital, nice folks. When my mother was sick, they put her in. It was COVID related, and they wouldn't let us go see her. And this was just this February, the end of January. They wouldn't let us go see her. Well, there's a state law that says that the living, that basically relatives have a right to go see their loved ones in the hospital. You can put PPE on, you can protect people. They wouldn't, and we had to actually make calls to the legislature, and then the hospital finally acquiesced because we knew that they would face a daily fine for not letting us see her. And they said, this is the narcissism that they told us. We realize you have powerful friends. That was not the correct answer. That was not the correct statement. What we did was we just illustrated to the hospital that every citizen has this right. And we pushed back very hard. Everyone, not just us because we made a phone call, everyone you're denying, you are breaking the law by denying them. And they were telling us there were people with Alzheimer's that are in that hospital due to the way rooms are set up that haven't seen a relative in a year. That is
not like they're going to know.
But that is not necessarily, but they do remember. And that's the medieval, that's cruel. It's unjust. It's not right. It's wrong. And anybody with half a brain knows that that's wrong. And so for those people that are confused, addled, and haven't been able to see a relative because of COVID, that's just not the reality. Those people do have a right. And the hospital has an obligation to let people know they have a right.
And that's why we are going up against it and having Mr. Falwell on the show next week so we can, unpack even more of this, where it's coming from and why, and see if we can't improve the lives of the people in our area. And I'm waiting for my computer to cooperate. There we are. Because it is break time, and when we come back, Dan Roman from Living Fit After 50, the show that airs on the Big Talker 1 o'clock on Fridays, will be with us to answer some important questions for us old people. And with that in mind, wait for it. There it is, the Big Talker. Be right back after these messages. Don't go nowhere.
Hello, I'm Matt Bennett with WWAY News. Wilmington City Council has approved funding to begin part of a major construction project. Council approved a nearly $500,000 engineering contract with WSP USA Inc. for Phase 1 of the Downtown Trail. The proposed contract is for design only. Future right-of-way and construction activities will require additional funding. This phase of the Downtown Trail project is for a little over 2 miles, extending from 3rd Street to the Love Grove Memorial Bridge. A master plan for a half-mile segment of the trail, known as the Wilmington Rail Trail, was adopted by City Council in 2021. At Tuesday's New Hanover County Board of Commissioners meeting, Commissioner Rob Zappel made a point to call out Novant Health New Hanover Regional Medical Center for long wait times and other concerns brought up by members of the community. Zappel called on County Manager Chris Coudray to look into the contract the commissioner signed with Novant when it purchased the hospital. The agreement says the level of healthcare would remain the same or better than what NHRMC was already providing, but Zappel says that is not the case. He pointed to WWAY's reports on what he calls unacceptable wait times in the emergency room and a shortage of nurses. The State Department of Health and Human Services is expanding eligibility for the monkeypox vaccine. Starting today, the state will end requirements that might have prevented some gay, bisexual, or others from getting vaccinated. The CDC reports nearly 80% of those testing positive for monkeypox report man-to-man sexual contact. The new criteria will also open the vaccine to people who have HIV or those taking medication to prevent it. And Attorney General Josh Stein's office wants parents to be aware of sextortion schemes. Sextortion occurs when a person contacts a minor online, often on gaming systems, apps, or social media. Stein says parents should monitor their children's social media use and make sure they know not to communicate with people whose identities you haven't verified. If you are a victim of sextortion, contact your local FBI field office. For more on these stories, you can go to WWAYTV3.com. I'm Matt Bennett. Have a great day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm WWAY meteorologist Ramel Carpenter with your Storm Track 3 forecast. Another unsettled afternoon in the Cape Fear region as a cold front begins to work its way into our area. Ahead of it, though, it's going to be warm and muggy as our temperatures get back into the low 90s inland of the coast, middle and upper 80s along the immediate coastline, and with Hurricane Earl hundreds of miles to our east, we are going to see a high risk for rip currents for east-facing beaches later today. As for tonight, quiet conditions stick around as our temperatures drop down into the low 70s. Get your full forecast on WWAY and WWAYTV3.com.
This news and weather is brought to you by Two Men and a Truck. For your free quote, go to twomenandatruck.com. twomenandatruck.com.
Join us this Tuesday at 6 p.m. on All Things Brunswick. Our guest is Brian Wilson, who is running for District Court Judge for Brunswick, Columbus, and Bladen counties. All Things Brunswick, Tuesdays, 6 p.m.
If you enjoy the programming on The Big Talker, the best way to take it with you wherever you go and have access anytime you want it is the Big Talker app. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. Go to bigtalker.live, download it for your Apple or Android device. Has all kinds of options for you. You can listen to programming, our video content. You can even watch it right there live on the app. Go to bigtalker.live, download the app for Android or Apple, and enjoy content from The Big Talker wherever you go, whenever you want it, however you want it.
To some, the sound of a baby babbling doesn't mean much, but that's not true. They're testing out vowels and consonants and trying different sounds. And by 12 months, their babbling is beginning to take on meaning, especially if there's no babbling at all. Little to no babbling by 12 months or later is just one of the possible signs of autism in children. Learn more at autismspeaks.org. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
Hey, welcome back to the Big Talker, the Asylum, your refuge in a world gone mad in the mornings. As promised, we have Chad Adams, the smart guy, with us. Now, the health and fitness guy, right?
What?
I mean, I may have to
Man,
like.
TK is an asylum. When he says things like that, it's like, okay, you know, I would be insulted if
That was like a
said
backhand slap to me.
It really was.
Well,
It was
you
an
didn't even let me
unfair
finish. You didn't even let me finish. Because
You can't
Dan
dig yourself
Roman,
up.
who is probably the healthiest guy among us all, right? So we got a smart
Not
guy,
pro-
a
no,
healthy guy, and then me.
Not probably. He is the healthiest guy.
Well, I don't know if I'd rather be healthier or smarter. I don't know.
Well, you played football, so that's going to be a hard stigma to overcome.
Yeah, I had my share of concussions too, which probably didn't help. It explains a lot, doesn't it?
I'll
Hey,
defer
Dan,
that
we'll
one to
just
Bill.
repeat ourselves. We'll repeat
Those-
ourselves often.
The funniest story I had with football, second play of the game, I got leveled by someone. I mean, he just decleated me, destroyed me. I was knocked out. I came out for one play. Smelling salts, back in. Apparently, I had the game of my life. 2 sacks, a lot of quarterback pressures, and I don't remember any of it.
He must have been mad.
We've come a long way from the days when it was just get back out on the field.
Oh, yeah. That was my dad's thing, right? You break your leg, rub a little dirt on it, walk it off, you'll be fine.
Well, it's like when they go in the locker room to have x-rays taken. I hate to break it to you. They're not taking x-rays. They're shooting them up with
hydrocortisone and lidocaine and
it's lidocaine and cortisone sometimes. Yep. They're shooting them up so they can get them back out on the field. Now they do it in a tent on the field, but we're not supposed to talk about that.
Now, I do have a serious question for you, and it does come from a personal place, as the last 3 weeks have done. Appliances, prosthetics, and crutches, if you will, in fitness, because there are times you see people with maybe a leg brace doing lifts or squat. They're working out and they have some sort of appliance, or even the wrist wraps for the power lifters, that sort of thing. That's what I use. Is there a point where some of these might be hindering the healing process or not benefiting? Like in a knee brace, how much of the weight is actually allowing the tendons and soft tissue to work out? Is there a point where it becomes almost like atrophy? That's the word I'm looking for, where you're letting the hardware do the hard work.
This is a great question, and there's no one answer for it. So I'll use myself as an example because I use knee wraps when I lift. There's enough of you. Yeah. I use knee wraps, and I also use straps. In my case, the straps that I use primarily on deadlifting, I use because my left hand, the arthritis had kicked in and I can't hold the bar. So there's only so much weight on the bar that hand can handle. By wearing the straps, it allows me to lift heavier. So in that case, I think you called it an appliance. We'll go with that.
I'm not sure what the terms are.
Yeah, lifting aids. There's the one thing you'll find about fitness is what you think is the definition. There's 100 different ones. Like you asked,
like
I was at a conference one time and the guy on the stage said, "What's a burpee?" And there were, no joke, there's probably 100 of us in the audience. He got like 20 different answers, but we'll go with your term, appliance. And so in my case, that's where the appliance or assistance allows me to lift heavier, because I might be limited to, say 354, 100 pounds, because that's all my hand can hold. But because I have that lifting strap with me, I can get up around 500. When it comes to bracing, same type thing. I wear knee braces because I have a really bad right knee. Playing football, I
got leveled on the first play.
Yeah, well,
that'll do it. I mean, I would have been broken in half. You would have just buried me in 2 different boxes at that point.
Yeah, you would have been. No, I was playing on the line, and the guy did an illegal cut on me and blew out my entire right knee. Patella tendon was a partial tear. ACL and MCL were full tears. So that was in 1982. I'm still feeling the effects of that. So knee braces there do the same thing. They allow me to go heavier. Now, is there a point where they're taking on more of the load? Theoretically, it could be. You would be talking more about hard braces. Like at one point, I had a hard knee brace, right, as opposed to the soft
with the little hinge.
Yeah, now that actually hindered me with my lifting.
Okay.
It actually was a negative to your point, not because in and of itself it wasn't good. It was limiting my range of motion, which is what it's supposed to do, by the way. And it was making it dangerous for me to lift, right? So I would go down in a squat and my knee would be going, no, you're not doing that. Or actually the brace would be. So that's why I don't wear it to this day. But there are people like Lori and I both, when we train people, we have people that are in walkers and we utilize that. We have people that have the various types of knee braces. We've got people with wrist braces. The key is you got to make sure the form is right. If the appliance or tool or whatever you want to call it is limiting your ability to do an exercise, then you probably need to do a completely different exercise. We're assuming that there's a valid reason you have a brace or whatever. The other side of it is you could be looking at maybe you don't need the brace, and that was my case. But there was a decision that I made. To this day, the doctors are like, "You really shouldn't be doing that," and I'd say, "Shut up, doc."
That's my line.
Well, I mean, you go in. I had a physical a couple of weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago now. And she knows what I do for a living, and she knows how I lift, and she's really good about it. She just kind of chuckles, how much you lift and all that. She knows I have a bad knee. She knows I have bad shoulders. But the reason I do all that stuff is so I don't have to have a knee replacement, for example, or shoulder replacements. I was told I would need a knee replacement about 13 years ago. I still haven't had to actually do it because I lift the way I do. But I also have to recognize that I'm older now. I can't lift the way I did in my 20s and 30s. And I do have to incorporate tools like lifting straps. When we're training people that have limitations, that's kind of our specialty, actually. We work around things. If they can't do a particular exercise, we do something else. If they can, but they have to have some variations on it, we do that. There's all sorts of options. So to someone who's struggling with that, I would say don't let it stop you. If you have to wear a brace, ankle, knee, wrist, those are the most common ones. Great, no problem. We'll work around it.
And some of these softer, like the knee thing that you're wearing now, is more to help keep everything in place, right? Because as you start to lift with a bad knee, the knee may want to go sideways or a little wonky, that the sock is just enough pressure to keep it in place, but the tendons and soft tissue and muscle are still carrying that load as you lift.
In my particular case, I wear the knee brace because my ACL anterior tends to try and pop out. So to use your terminology is a great way to put it. It kind of holds it in place. Because, when I go down in a squat, I might have, say, 400 pounds on my back. If that knee were to go, and it's always an option, right? I mean, I have safety rails and all that. So if my knee blew out, I would end up on my knees.
But
probably,
not crushed by a weight.
But not crushed by the weight because I use the safety bars, which is something a lot of people don't do in the big gyms. That's why you see those injuries. That's why the woman, we talked about this, I don't know, a couple months back, where the woman got killed doing squats. Mm-hmm. It wasn't because of the weight. It was bad form, and she wasn't using the safety rails properly.
Hey, Dan?
Yes.
My friend Joe Bastardi, he's a climate scientist. He started Weather Bell Analytics. He's a huge weightlifting, bodybuilding kind of guy too. He's still into his 60s. He competes. He said something interesting to me, and I want you to see if you'll verify it. I was talking to him about fat burning with respect to lifting, and he said that squats, because you were talking about squats, were the singular most fat burning thing. He said something about that particular exercise sets the entire body in motion to increase metabolic activity and really, really does things in all muscle groups just about. Can you verify that?
I can tell you with absolute certainty that is correct. I use two different exercises, Chad, for that. One is the deadlift and the second is squat, and it's 1 and 1A. Now, you'll get some quibbling between people. They'll say the squat does more. Some people will say the deadlift does more. It's essentially the same. And to your point, they're full body exercises. People think, all right, I'm doing a squat, I'm just doing my lower body. But the fact is, the kinetic chain to hold that barbell on your back, you're involving your chest, your back, your shoulders, of course, your lower body. Pretty much, I always tell people it's everything but the top of your head. All of that working.
And your belly.
You're working in the biggest muscle in your body. The biggest muscle in your body is your glute, right? Your butt. Mm-hmm. So what exercises are going to target and work that the most? That would be deadlifts and squats, which in turn causes more fat burning because you're going to use more energy. right? It's thermodynamics. People don't realize. That's why when people say to me, calories don't matter, well, then you're saying the law of thermodynamics doesn't apply, because it's pure energy. We create energy from food and fat. So squats in particular, especially if you're lifting heavy, yes, you would burn more fat. You're going to burn more calories that way. Where people get confused is cardio when you're doing it, let's say running, you burn more calories while you actually do it. That's true. So if you run for an hour and you burn, I'm just going to make numbers up, 500 calories, and then you lifted for an hour, you might only burn 350 lifting. But for the hours after that, it's called epoch. When you're running, when you stop, you essentially stop the burning process, right? You got your 500, you're done. Lifting, your body's got to repair the muscle tissue and all that. You're going to burn 50 to 100 extra calories for up to 24 hours later. That's a massive amount of calories.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm more the running side than the building side, right?
Mhm.
So for me, what I found was absolutely true what you said. When you get that heart rate up, at a certain level, whether you're lifting or you're running, your body's really doing something at that point when the heart rate's up. You got to monitor that heart rate. I learned that's difficult for me to learn, but I did. Having played sports for 20-some years, not the kind you did. I was more on the running side. But let me ask you this. So if you start running, like I was running every day, and I noticed that's when the metabolism started changing. It wasn't just when I was running, but whereas lifting, it carries forward that day. Running, once you tune your body to a certain point, it stays in tune a little longer as well. Am I missing something, or that's an observation?
You're spot on with that. So I always tell people, if you're doing cardio, whether it's running, biking, it doesn't matter. Your body's going to adapt to what you're doing. So if you do, maybe you did this, you do the same run every day, right? There's people that go out and run their neighborhood every day.
So
let's say 3 miles.
Yeah.
Your body's going to adapt to that roughly 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, we're human beings,
about right.
But it's in that range. So you have to either increase your mileage, increase your tempo, speed, to get more out of it, which most people don't do. They do the same thing. I always laugh. There was a woman at the YMCA up north that I worked at, came in every single day, got on the treadmill, and did the exact same workout for years and never got any changes. And she couldn't understand why. And I'm like, you got to change it up. Whereas lifting, now the common misnomer that people have is you get no cardio from lifting. Come lift with me, my friend, and I will show you how you get cardio out of it. And that's one of the things that our clients often talk about is I don't realize how much I'm pushing my heart in a good way when I'm lifting. But it is different. You're going to get most of the time higher heart rates, right? I'm a rower also. So back when I competed in rowing, I would drive my heart rate over 200 for 5-6 minutes. Wow. Which you want to see a doctor freak out, tell them that sometime. But my body was adapted to that, to your point, right? We rode every single day. We regularly did that. My body adapted to it, and I was fine. So that's where the struggle that people have is they don't advance things. They do the same route over and over again. It's where you want to incorporate hills. Not that we have any in southeastern North Carolina, but
the dunes, bro. You got to stay off the dunes.
You got Front Street, and that's about it, right? You've got to either do hill training, as I said earlier, up your tempo. So if you're running at 5 miles an hour, go to 5.5 or 6. Or your distance, instead of 3 miles, go to 3.5, because your body will adapt. And once it adapts, it's not a bad thing to go out and exercise. Of course, that's good, but you're not getting the same benefit that you would if you pushed it a little bit.
So Dan, tell me where I went wrong or where I went right. So what I did, I'm not a calorie counter, but like you said, fats are one way you get calories. And so I was a, keto carb kind of guy. And so I was doing the running. I was doing the same distance, but I was increasing the speed while limiting the intake, and the weight really came off. I mean, with the running, it really, and I felt better. I was sleeping better. I felt better. I felt stronger. And I was doing that until my mother passed away. I was doing it daily, and it was really I felt more finely tuned than I had in a long time. What am I missing? What did I do wrong?
I don't think you did anything necessarily wrong. One thing that I would caution on, you mentioned keto. I am neutral on every diet out there, because they all work except keto, and because keto is dangerous health-wise. Your body, and in particular your brain, is not adapted. They'll tell you it adapts. Keto was designed for an epileptic. It's a medical diet. It's supposed to be done under medical care. Unfortunately, it's become mainstream. Your body will adapt to running on fat instead of carbohydrates, but it's nowhere near as efficient. So to your point, the reason you started dropping weight and leaning out wasn't because you did keto, it's because you limited the number of calories you were eating.
Right. Because whether you're keto or not, you're still limiting calories.
It's pure calories. The formula is very simple. It's calories in versus calories out. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't care what diet you do. It'll work if you eat less than you burn.
Sugar, especially sugar.
Well, I always joke about, it's funny you say that. I always joke about with people, I say, you could have nothing but Coke, Snickers, and I don't know, ring dings. That's your entire diet. But if you eat less of that calorie-wise than your body burns, you will lose weight.
Ding, 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 ding.
Nutrition-wise, that's a whole other story, right? That's a separate, but you would lose weight. Conversely, if you ate pure healthy, nothing but the best, right? But you ate more than your body will burn, guess what? You're going to put on the weight. So it's always a balancing act. And the nasty thing about it is as soon as you think you figured it out, your body's going to go, nope, time to change, and make you adapt again. We're constantly adapting. So in your case, probably what it was, Chad, is because you had to slow down, unfortunately, because of your mom, your body, if you didn't lower your calorie intake at that point, your body's going to start putting on fat again and slow down and all that.
But it didn't happen fast, though. Whereas a lot of times people go off a diet, they gain weight fast. I guess it had tuned to a point, and my physical activity still stays. So it wasn't like I packed on 20 pounds. It was I packed on 6 more pounds, and I want to get those 6 off. But so here we are, and I just am active, but I'm not pushing that. We moved. But anyway, the point is I was eating healthier. It wasn't that I was just eating meat and bacon and cheese and eggs every day. I mean, there was nuts and fruit and a lot of vegetables in there, a lot of salads in there too. So it was a healthier eating approach, and staying away from sugar. And that wasn't, look, I still had coffee and stuff like that, but sugar, man, for me, some people aren't really sugar freaks, but man, I tell you, that's one thing you really have to break like an addiction. If you like, Krispy Kreme donuts and a glass of milk, whew. You got
the standard American breakfast, right?
Bob Dixon is enjoying this conversation, by the way. So apparently we are doing good for our community.
Oh, now Bob, this is funny. Since I'm going to tell on Bob. Bob, successful guy, and you'll look at his posts, and he's lost a lot of weight and stayed healthy. But what he posts is absolutely horrific. He loves Bojangles biscuits, and he loves posting his Bo Cheddars and everything. He posts some of the most unhealthy meals, but they're absolutely delicious meals. But Bob tries to take care of himself. So I appreciate you sharing that Bob was watching and paying attention, because he's a good guy, but it's funny. He's one of the guys, look at his posts sometimes. He's a fun guy to follow and a very bright conservative mind. But
his diet's worse than mine. Biscuits. Is that what you're, because I don't do cheddar biscuits, but me and the Waffle House go back a long way.
Hey, I avoid Bojangles like the plague for look, I'm not getting any money from it, and I don't have anything against it. It's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah, they were being catered by Bojangles. I took one bite, and I was like, this logo is not for me.
See, I've never had Bojangles, so I can't speak to it. I'm a Chick-fil-A guy.
Okay, you're going to have to do it just once and report to us from the hospital.
It's funny you say
Not
that.
Not from Novant, though. We're going to take you to Dover.
No, don't get me going on Novant. Or do. It's funny because Chad mentioned sugar and all that. One of the things you'll find, and I run across this, is, I generally eat 85, 90%, let's call it clean. And I have, my little treats here and there. But I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I had a lot of sugar in a particular day. I just went nuts. And my body revolted. I was in the bathroom a lot. I literally got a nasty
you're over 50
from it. Sugar is not good for us.
Especially
we could spend hours talking about that.
Especially as you get older. Now, Dan, see, if I have sugar at night, the next morning is when my body feel like my hands will be tighter. And it's the weirdest thing because it took me a while to figure it out. But it's like, wait, if I eat any sugar after 5 o'clock the next morning, man, I can tell. I can just tell.
Yeah.
Sounds
You're
silly.
dumping all that sugar into your bloodstream and spiking your glucose levels.
Yeah,
And your body's going, no, right? Salt is the other one for some people as they get older. And I noticed this too. I went out to dinner the other day and my hands were like sausages 2 days later because I don't know of a chef that doesn't like salt. I mean, I've trained chefs. They tell me how much salt
You
they put
have
on.
to have it in dude, if you cook, that is, and in fact, you don't just add salt at the plate, right? You add it before, you put it on the meat before you cook it. You put it on the meat after you cook it. And then you put it on the things you put on the meat or with the meat. Yep. You're also putting it. So it is, and this is funny. I read this because I am an acutely aware of bizarre, there may be interesting but useless information. And it was that the closest aligned liquid to human blood on the planet Earth is seawater.
Yes, that's true.
Blood is so salty. It is almost identical to seawater with respect to salt content. People don't realize how salty human blood is. I guess if you're vampiric, yeah, but otherwise, no.
Yeah, that's why mosquitoes like us so much, right?
Yes.
Yeah, its salinity level is about the same. I mean, there's a little bit of difference, but that's a really good analogy. I'm glad you brought that one up because that is true. So the thing, though, is salt levels in the American diet, we're talking in the thousands upon thousands. When I work with people, I see sometimes they're taking in 6, 7, 8,000 milligrams of salt a day, and they don't realize it because, as you said, it's in everything. I always joke about. I had one time I went to buy frozen fruit, so I looked at the back of the package, and ingredient 1 was fruit, and ingredient 2 was salt. And I'm like, why even bother? It's frozen. You don't need to preserve it. But they added it for the flavor, Recommendations right now, I mean, it was 2,300 milligrams. They're actually starting to move towards 1,500, which is what normally is the standard for someone who has heart issues. They really want to lower. What's that?
D5W, dextrose water 5%. They have another saline solution. What's that percentage? So when they take you into the hospital and they need to get fluids into you, they don't use regular water. They use a saline solution that's at 3%?
I'm not sure on that, what the percentage is. I don't know. But
that's still a pretty good amount of salt that if you're just looking at it like eating a spoonful of salt, it's a lot. I mean, that's a gram and a half.
To Dan's point, though, those are salines because it also helps remove stuff that may be in lines and all. But
right.
To Dan's point, I was just looking at the population exceeding the recommended sodium limit, and people age 60 and over, females 72% on a day-to-day basis, males 94%. We love our salt. Men, average intakes 97% of males, over it 82% of females, 31 to 59. I think that catches us. 60 and over was what I just gave. And then almost across the board, it's not for men from ages 2 through 80. It's over 90% on a day-to-day basis. The only people that slow down taking too much salt in are people over the age of 60. Everyone else, women are in the 70s or 80s, men are in the 90s, almost 100%.
And I see that on a daily basis with people. What happens, though, as you get older, you might come back on salt a little bit, but sugar levels our sugar intake increases.
Sure, you don't have as much time left, so you're like, I'm going to have that Krispy Kreme before I die.
Right.
I got to get the pumpkin spice. Give me that pumpkin spice.
I'm 75 years old. I'm going to die anyway, so let me eat not one Krispy Kreme, but the entire dozen.
I'm going to do the Krispy Kreme challenge.
I want one of every flavor.
At my 5K. There you go.
Although I prefer Wake and Bacon.
Oh my God, those people! Wait, they cram a dozen Krispy Kremes worth of calories and sugar into one donut. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So you only eat one, but you're done.
Yeah, but you could work the farm for the rest of the day on that amount of energy.
Pretty much. I mean, I got one on my birthday, and no joke, I had it at like 8 in the morning. I didn't eat again until almost 6 at night. I was so full, and my body just went, hello. We stopped, we picked it up, we went to the beach. I'm sitting on the beach going, wow.
So I'm going to ask Dan this. We're at the top of the hour. We need to take a break, but I'll ask him. We're going to run a little long because this is a great question for Dan. With respect to government guidelines, haven't we seen a great deal of government misinformation in our diets over the past 50 years? I mean, they screwed up. They did push
milk is going to kill you.
Carbs. They did push a lot of things, margarine over butter. They pushed a lot of things that were absolutely horrible and contributed to this diabetic pandemic we have right now. Those were a lot of government guidelines. All these breakfast cereals are going to be good for you. All this other stuff is fine for you because it's fortified. And they were just wrong. And so it's very difficult for the people to trust the government on anything related to diet, because more and more now we're seeing meta studies that a lot of the conclusions of the previous studies were just wrong because of the conclusions they were after rather than what the studies were actually telling them.
The main one that I always refer to in regards to what you're saying, Chad, is the sugar, right?
Yeah.
So the studies came out in the 60s that said that fat made you fat and sugar was okay. What people didn't realize is, guess who bought and paid for that study? The sugar industry.
Sugar cane, baby.
And then the government.
But it's more than that. It's even more than that. They were telling people in the 70s that carbs were okay for diabetics. Yep. My grandfather was a diabetic. He stopped eating all sugar, but he was eating puffed rice for breakfast every day because it didn't have sugar in it.
Yep. And that's where the government got involved, right? They used those studies. They got bought and paid for by the sugar industry, lobbyists. And so they said, yeah, carbs are great. Go ahead. Have all you want. Have all the sugar you want. Think about low-fat foods. Remember, all three of us are old enough to remember they came out with the various low-fat foods in the 70s and 80s. Well, they made up for the fat with sugar. And you can directly trace the obesity epidemic to the government's guidelines that came out in the early to mid-70s. The classic food pyramid we all grew up on, right? That thing was criminal.
4432.
Yeah, it was criminal. And it's there now. They've revised it. Unfortunately, I don't think they've revised it that much better.
Well, I remember from that class that pizza was the best food because it had all four food groups in each bite. Bingo, done.
Well, I can't disagree with that from a personal perspective, the nutrition side of me, but when the government got involved, and it's a direct trace. That food pyramid came out, I believe it was 74. That the obesity epidemic started around.
Do you remember
70.
the show?
What's that?
Do you remember Mulligan Stew, the show they brought onto TV they brought it into the schools first, and then they ran it with Schoolhouse Rock's in the middle of cartoons.
Schoolhouse Rock was the one. Yeah, Schoolhouse Rock's the one I remember. Mulligan Stew, I don't know that one.
Okay, maybe it was a marketing area like ours, but it taught us the 4-4-2 or 3-2, the breads and the meats and the poultry and all of that is now you're ruining my childhood.
Yeah. Well, look at the other ones, eggs, right? 15 years ago, eggs were going to kill you.
Oh, so was milk until we discovered it took 30 gallons an hour.
Yeah, the FDA was coming out saying, we can't eat eggs, the cholesterol, blah, blah, blah. It was all based on one study that basically got torn apart a year later. But it took them better part of a decade, the government, to say, well, you know what, eggs are okay. And they are okay.
As long as you cook them.
Well, speaking as a guy who's dumb enough because of Rocky to drink, a dozen eggs raw, because that was the cool thing to do back then, and it's disgusting. But to Chad's point about the government, I personally don't trust the damn thing they say. The FDA is not out to look out for our health. Neither is the CDC, and COVID's the perfect example of it. When was the last time you heard Fauci or any one of those idiots come out and say, you know what, maybe you need to cut out some sugar, start exercising a few days a week, eat a little bit better, improve your immunity, and then you don't need to worry about COVID. Nope. To this day, I've yet to hear any of them say that. Which,
that would have saved us a lot of headache.
A lot. And instead, they pushed the jab. Trying to be polite so we don't get banned here, which ultimately didn't do what they said it was going to do, and trace the money, right? There's a lot of money to be made from that jab. There's not a lot of money in big pharma. You guys were talking about the hospital before I came on. Do doctors make money if people are healthy? No, right? They make their money when we're sick. And that's why you don't see the insurance companies pushing a lot. They'll give you we'll pay for a little bit of your gym membership. We'll send you to a nutrition class. There is so much they could be doing that they won't do because there's no money in it. Because if people are healthy, you don't need to see a doctor 3 times a year, 4 times a year. You go for your physical, address any issues and move on. That's my life. I haven't had major issues in my entire life because I work out and eat pretty decent. So my medical costs are nil compared to most people's. And they don't like that, right? They want to push pills on me. Well, you got to start thinking about no, I don't. There's no reason for me to. I'm perfectly healthy. And I was never worried about COVID because if I got it, and I'm in the older age group, so technically I was a risk. To this day, I've never gotten it. I've never had it. And I've been tested to see if I have. And even if I got it, I wasn't worried about it because my immune system is very, very good. So if I got it, yeah, I'd get sick. So what? It'd be like the flu for me. If I died, they always throw at me, well, you could have died. If I died, so be it. I was going to die anyway. Yeah, that's my viewpoint. You could die getting in your car and driving down the street. Okay.
There's a lot to be afraid of, and this ain't it.
Yeah, I mean, but for someone who's, morbidly obese, hasn't exercised in decades, and is in their 50s, 60s, 70s, yeah, there was a risk. I mean, the data's showing that.
I mean, if you're not willing to look both ways when crossing the street, you can't be surprised when you're hit by a car.
Exactly.
Right? But, so if you're living like I am, and at some point the doctor says, dude, you got about a week left, I can't be upset.
You are the sum of the choices you make day to day. I always tell people that. And they don't like hearing it, but you are the sum of the choices you make every day. Your health is 100% on you. And if you don't take time to take care of your health now, it will take care of you later. Or how does that go? If you don't take the time. You're close enough that
This is why I drink coffee.
Ring. Yeah. There's ultimately a price to be paid. And that's your individual decision. I don't judge people what they decide to do. I do, though, say you need to take ownership for what you decided to do. It's not menopause. It's not your hormones. It's not your heredity. It's that you didn't take care of your body. And if you had, things would be different. People don't like hearing that, but they need to hear that because that's the reality.
And that's the best way to end this segment because personal responsibility is, one of the bigger issues that we like to address here at the Big Talker. Certainly on the Asylum, your refuge here in the world gone mad. Hey, Dan, thanks for your time. If I don't see you, I will see you Friday.
You see me Friday, my friend.
And I'm sure we'll be having more conversations again before next Tuesday.
Yeah, Friday we're going to be talking about bariatric surgery. We have someone coming on who had it about 11 years ago. We're going to talk the pluses and minuses of it.
Man, that's heavy duty.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be a good show. 1 p.m. Friday.
See, that's why y'all should be tuning into the Big Talker Network every week. We have programs like this you will not find anywhere else. So if you all would just stay tuned for a moment, we will have Dr. Cahoon from the Cape Fear Riverwatch when we get back. Thank you very much. Don't go nowhere. The Asylum be right back in a minute. You're tuned in to the Big Talker Network, Wilmington, North Carolina's premier internet station for news and talk radio programming. Find us online at bigtalker.live.
Marine Service Pro and the Tackle Box Seafood, located at 8210 River Road, Southport, is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. With the Tackle Box open Monday through Saturday, 7 to 6. Marine Service Pro is a full Suzuki and Tohatsu dealership. They deal in pre-owned boats, full service and repair, with certified technicians in all engines, and fiberglass specialists. The Tackle Box offers fresh, local seafood, live bait, a tackle shop, and fish packing and shipping. They also offer a full-service U-Haul dealership. Spend time with Leon or Jenny for one-stop shopping at Marine Service Pro and the Tackle Box Seafood, 8210 River Road, Southport.
Hello, I'm Matt Bennett with WWAY News. Wilmington City Council has approved funding to begin part of a major construction project. Council approved a nearly $500,000 engineering contract with WSP USA Inc. for Phase 1 of the Downtown Trail. The proposed contract is for design only. Future right-of-way and construction activities will require additional funding. This phase of the Downtown Trail project is for a little over 2 miles, extending from 3rd Street to the Love Grove Memorial Bridge. A master plan for a half-mile segment of the trail, known as the Wilmington Rail Trail, was adopted by City Council in 2021. At Tuesday's New Hanover County Board of Commissioners meeting, Commissioner Rob Zappel made a point to call out Novant Health New Hanover Regional Medical Center for long wait times and other concerns brought up by members of the community. Zappel called on County Manager Chris Coudray to look into the contract the commissioner signed with Novant when it purchased the hospital. The agreement says the level of healthcare would remain the same or better than what NHRMC was already providing, but Zappel says that is not the case. He pointed to WWAY's reports on what he calls unacceptable wait times in the emergency room and a shortage of nurses. The State Department of Health and Human Services is expanding eligibility for the monkeypox vaccine. Starting today, the state will end requirements that might have prevented some gay, bisexual, or others from getting vaccinated. The CDC reports nearly 80% of those testing positive for monkeypox report man-to-man sexual contact. The new criteria will also open the vaccine to people who have HIV or those taking medication to prevent it. And Attorney General Josh Stein's office wants parents to be aware of sextortion schemes. Sextortion occurs when a person contacts a minor online, often on gaming systems, apps, or social media. Stein says parents should monitor their children's social media use and make sure they know not to communicate with people whose identities you haven't verified. If you are a victim of sextortion, contact your local FBI field office. For more on these stories, you can go to WWAYTV3.com. I'm Matt Bennett. Have a great day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm WWAY meteorologist Ramel Carpenter with your Storm Track 3 forecast. Another unsettled afternoon in the Cape Fear region as a cold front begins to work its way into our area. Ahead of it, though, it's going to be warm and muggy as our temperatures get back into the low 90s inland of the coast, middle and upper 80s along the immediate coastline, and with Hurricane Earl hundreds of miles to our east, we are going to see a high risk for rip currents for east-facing beaches later today. As for tonight, quiet conditions stick around as our temperatures drop down into the low 70s. Get your full forecast on WWAY and WWAYTV3.com.
This news and weather is brought to you by Two Men and a Truck. For your free quote, go to twomenandatruck.com. twomenandatruck.com.
Marine Service Pro and the Tackle Box Seafood, located at 8210 River Road, Southport, is open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, with the Tackle Box open Monday through Saturday, 7 to 6. Marine Service Pro is a full Suzuki and Tohatsu dealership. They deal in pre-owned boats, full service and repair, with certified technicians in all engines, and fiberglass specialists. The Tackle Box offers fresh, local seafood, live bait, a tackle shop, and fish packing and shipping. They also offer a full-service U-Haul dealership. Spend time with Leon or Jenny for one-stop shopping at Marine Service Pro and the Tackle Box Seafood, 8210 River Road, Southport.
Enjoying Big Talker Network is as easy as asking for it. Program your digital home assistants such as Google Home, Alexa, and Siri to stream Big Talker Network content by simple voice command. Enjoy convenient hands-free access to program whenever you want, however you want, by asking for Big Talker.
I like this.
Your wife, your little girls.
Yeah, if you don't join our band, I'm going to come here every night. That was a great movie.
Oh, wait. Oh, shoot. I got to do this. Here we go. Welcome back to the Asylum, your refuge here in a world gone mad, right here on the Big Talker Network. Please visit the Big Talker website, bigtalker.live. Download the app for Android and iOS devices. Pair that smart device with your automobile's entertainment system so you can take the Big Talker anywhere and everywhere you want to be, whether you want to be there or not. You can also peruse the schedule of content and send us an email with any comments, questions, critiques, compliments, or concerns you may have. We cannot improve without your help. And right now we have a special guest, Dr. Larry Cahoon with the Cape Fear Riverwatch, along with the other smart guy, Mr. Chad Adams, and I'm going to present quite the challenging question to Dr. Cahoon. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Here in the Cape Fear watershed in the river where we take our water from, we have discovered over this decades some items in our water that we don't like being in there. For example, the Gen X, the PFAS. But do we have any real documentation of damage to the human form from these elements?
Okay, let's define the chemicals first and go from there. Okay, the headline that broke this story about 5 years ago in the Star News was about one particular compound that we called Gen X that was manufactured, is still being manufactured by Chemours up the river near Fayetteville, and wound its way into the river. And as it turns out, it's distributed throughout the watershed and the air shed. In other words, it comes out of the air emissions from the plant. One of the important things to get across is that they started producing Gen X commercially in 2010. They had a permit from the feds to do that, and it was designed to serve as a replacement for another compound called PFOA, or C8, perfluorooctanoic acid, if you want to know the full name. The reason they wanted to replace PFOA was that it had been conclusively established that that was toxic to humans. And it took decades of research to figure that out. But
so toxic means actual, like, deadly.
Actual harm. And the harm from PFOA, I'll go into that a little bit later. But it was well documented by an extremely large epidemiological study. And so in 2006, when the powers that be, and that would be EPA and other folks involved with this work, had established that this compound was dangerous to humans and that it was getting out into the environment, there was a consent agreement reached between EPA and the chemical companies that they would phase out production of PFOA and switch over to something else. In the case of DuPont, Chemours was formed in 2015 as an offshoot of DuPont. DuPont agreed to do that in 2006. They started producing Gen X at Fayetteville Works in 2010. Near as we can tell, a lot of that's proprietary, but they had a permit in late 2009, early 2010, and we believe they started producing it then. They did not stop producing PFOA until about April of 2013. So they're still producing it. Now, production is one thing. Gen X was produced as a commercial product, as I said, starting in about 2010. However, Gen X was also generated as a byproduct of their vinyl ethers plant, which had been built back in 1980. And the byproduct was released in the waste streams, that is, air and water emissions, starting at about 1980. So the compound we know as Gen X was being produced as one of many byproducts that went into the river and up into the air starting about 1980. So the distribution of that stuff, not surprisingly, is all over the river in the sediments and the wetlands and via the air transport throughout the air shed, that area of the countryside that's within reach of aerial deposition from the smokestacks up there. Do they have emission controls? Yeah, they did. But they were not required to regulate those particular emissions for those compounds. I can dig deeper into that if we ever get to that, but I've seen their air emission reports for a couple of years.
And that's just the air, the effluents as well.
Yeah. Most of the air pollutants were removed by scrubbers, and the scrubbers converted the air stuff, the aerial stuff, into aqueous stuff. So they removed it from the gases venting from the plant, put it into the water discharge that went into the river. And so that's how those compounds got into our drinking water. Now, I want to emphasize that Gen X is just the poster child. There were many of these compounds. They're collectively referred to as PFAS, for perfluorinated and polyfluorinated alkylated substances. So that's a real tongue twister. PFAS.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. So there's a whole host of compounds, and I think there's something like 54 that we have established came out of the plant. There's probably a lot more than that in trace quantities that are harder to find and harder to quantify. But there's a long list of compounds, and they occur in some number of different classes of PFAS compounds. I don't want to get too far down into that rat hole, except to say that there are sulfonates, and there are carboxylic acids, and there are polyethers, and so on and so on. That won't mean much to a whole lot of people, but the reason I mentioned those is that Gen X is a monoether carboxylic acid compound. PFOA is a carboxylic acid PFAS. PFOS, PFOS, the stuff that was used in firefighting foams and so on.
Huh.
Perfluorooctane sulfonate, that's a sulfonate compound. PFOA and PFOS, I'm going to say it with a hard O, are two legacy compounds. They're no longer produced in the United States because they've been found to be toxic to humans. And their production was eliminated because of that toxicity that is now well known and well described. They're still the two compounds about which we know the most because they have a long history of being produced. PFOA came into production in 1951. DuPont, by the way, had reason to suspect its toxicity decades before anybody did anything about it.
Now, Doc, there's just one update, because I was looking through this after Tiki had discussed it with me, that it as of March of 2021, the EPA finally did publish a fourth regulatory determination. They're going to start. They didn't start regulating any of those, the PFOAs or PFOSs in drinking water, and they still they're moving in that direction. So the toxicity and stuff, even though some well known, they haven't been able to produce the cancer clusters in this, and also Gen X leaving the body. But they do know, they as you said, some of this stuff is documented, but the EPA is way behind the times on this with respect. So that just want to add that fact.
They literally just put out proposal to consider them as hazardous chemicals.
Right.
Literally in the last month, they determined that they were hazardous chemicals under RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act.
Because they're not having regulations until this fall. This fall is when they're going to start.
Yeah, that's right. So the federal regulators are decades behind the science. And the open science, that is, the science you see published in the open literature, is often decades behind the company's science. The companies generally have a far better grasp of these kinds of things. They don't beat the bushes extensively on toxicity. They do what they're required to do, but they often know more than they let out, which is not surprising. So, the regulatory system is very, very, very slow to act. It doesn't act proactively. It's reactively. Only after we figure out that, oops, we shouldn't have been doing this for 40 years, do they come around to regulate something. Some of that's politics, too. I mean, to be blunt about it, some federal administrations have been friendlier to polluters than others, and so EPA kind of blows with the wind on these things. The current EPA administrator, is Michael Reagan, who came from North Carolina. He was our DEQ secretary. And so he was sitting in the catbird seat here when this Gen X story broke. So he's quite familiar with that as a problem, and it's been one of his priorities. But prior to that, the regulators weren't moving real fast. For that matter, when you come back down to the state level, and this is a point I like to get across to people. Our state regulators and the Department of Environmental Quality, and before that, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, were aware that these compounds were being discharged into the Cape Fear River as early as 2002. That's before Gen X was known about. They knew that, Chemours or DuPont actually told them in writing in a certified letter that I've seen, we're discharging they didn't name the compounds, they were real cagey. We're discharging byproducts. We think they might be toxic. The Clean Water Act requires us to measure and disclose them, but we don't have the technology to do that, which was a lie. Are we required to disclose? And they sent this to the Diener Regional Office in Fayetteville by certified mail. And, that means you sign a receipt to indicate you got it. And the response was nothing. Diener did nothing about that. They never said boo. In 2016, Detlef Kanapi, my colleague at NC State, who pioneered a lot of the work on this Gen X stuff, along with his EPA colleagues in Research Triangle Park, published his work showing that there were these compounds in our drinking water. In November of 2016, it was in the published literature, peer-reviewed stuff. He wrote to the Deputy Secretary of DEQ and told him flat out, you've got PFAS contaminants in the drinking water supply getting through the treatment systems in Wilmington and other towns on the river. They did nothing. They knew about this. They did nothing. So we have a regulatory problem, and part of it is it takes a long time for them to catch up, and part of it is they don't want to hear it. It's la, 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 la. And you can speculate as to why that's true. And I'm not going to go there, but they were told, the regulators knew about it, and they did nothing, and that was a choice. So, I would take a hard look at how that happened.
Now,
and all of that being said, worth noting that all of that is needed. And certainly, we're at a time period where we don't trust many of our government agencies right now. In the shadow of COVID, there's a lot more questions.
You have to hold their feet to the fire all the time. That's right. Where the media comes in. That's what we're doing. The good news,
though, the good news when I'm looking at studies and medical studies that are coming out from the region, luckily, we haven't seen, or at least I am not aware of, as I continue to monitor this, because I live here at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. And everything downstream, and you drive by that Cahoon plant on Highway 87, you can see it, Fayetteville Works and up in that area. There haven't been these clusters, luckily. At least I haven't seen evidence of any clusters. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but the good news right now is it looks like the levels that people were getting were low enough to not have these liver lesions. And it's not just cancer. People jump on chemicals. It's chemicals and cancer, but there's liver issues. There's blood-related issues. It's not just cancer that we have to look at.
Well, let me back you up here. There are some epidemiological studies underway. And I'm actually a participant in one of them. It's a blood draw study. And they're looking at body levels of these compounds. There have been two of these. The initial study was done with about 1,500 people in the Wilmington area. As sample sizes go for human epidemiology, which is extremely complicated, that's pretty small. The second study they haven't reported results yet, so I do not know how many people they sampled. It's all voluntary. I'm guessing it's a bit bigger. They publicized it more. They asked for more folks. Epidemiology in humans is extremely complex. You have to establish a statistically significant link between exposure, and that has to be judged in some way, and the consequences, and you have to separate all of those consequences from all the other background causes. It's correlative. In other words, we're looking for correlations. And with a very noisy set of data like that, you need a very, very, very large sample size. And you need a hell of a lot of information to go along with it. The very best study of that kind ever done was done with PFOA exposure up in West Virginia at the Parkersburg DuPont plant. They sampled 65,000 people, and they collected all this health information. They actually paid people to come and give their blood samples. I think they gave them a couple $100 a piece, and folks lined up to do that. They had money from legal action. This is a story that was told in that movie Dark Waters, but they had about 65,000 people that they sampled after all this exposure. And it took the science panel that looked at the results 5 years to sort through all the data and figure out that PFOA exposure was significantly, and that's a special term in science, means that it's statistically significant. It's real. And I think there were there were 6 different human health effects that they picked up. Liver effects, a couple of cancers, reproductive effects, and things like that. And I mean, I don't have the list in my head. But
you also you're talking about the PFOA test, and 98% of Americans, 98%, at least what I've read, 98% of us test positive for this. Right. So it's very difficult to weed out and say that's what's, as you said, the challenge, whether it's nutrition studies or health studies, is finding, it's kind of like if within 2 weeks of dying is 80% of people ate broccoli. And then you'd say, well, broccoli's causing their deaths. You can't, the correlation and causation is very difficult to establish.
That's right. And you know, this was the argument used about cigarette smoking. Okay. When we were looking at the effects of cigarette smoking in terms of causing lung cancer, there were necessarily correlation studies. Okay. We're not allowed to do experimental manipulations on people with potentially lethal agents. It's against the law. We did that back in the 30s to black people with syphilis and so on, but it's illegal. We hanged a whole lot of Nazis for doing that. So we're constrained to looking at exposure, however we can measure that, and possible consequences, and pick that signal out from the noise that's generated by the fact that there are so many of us doing so many different things. Like you say, we could probably come up with, 80% of people before they died ate broccoli. But that doesn't mean a whole lot statistically. When you look at all the other possible effects and get all the information you can get, you can begin to tease out some of these effects. The other approach that we take, well, there are 2 other approaches. One is that we can experiment with animals, and we do that. And the basis for the toxicity studies that have been done and used by EPA and others to regulate compounds in general is mice and rats. And we have purebred lines of mice and purebred lines of rats that are used for these studies. And we know in intimate detail how vulnerable they are to cancer in general and so forth and so on. And we expose them deliberately to these compounds in their water and or their food. And we can get a dose-response effect. And then because we're trying to be conservative to protect human life, we can calculate correction factors for we usually use an order of magnitude difference between the concentration at which we get an effect in rats and the concentration where we'd expect to see one in humans, so on and so on. And they come up with a mathematical estimate of relative toxicity. And we've done thousands and thousands and thousands of toxicity tests like this for lots and lots of compounds. That's one approach, okay? The other is that we look at the molecular modes of action of these compounds. PFAS compounds are interesting because unlike a lot of other carcinogens and other toxins, they don't associate in the body with the kinds of tissues and cells that you usually find with other toxins. For example, we know that mercury in the body, usually as methylmercury, builds up in fatty tissues. And it's particularly dangerous for humans because there's a lot of lipid or fatty type material in brains, sphingolipids and things like that tend to attract a lot of mercury. And so we know that mercury tends to build up in brains and in livers and so on. We also know that it associates with fatty molecules, okay? With PFAS compounds, they behave differently. They don't build up in fatty tissues. They seem to stick to proteins. And that's a whole diverse world of stuff that's possible. And it's extremely complicated. You have many, many thousands and thousands of different proteins. One of the sets of proteins that humans have is a set of proteins embedded in the cell membranes around each cell. The membranes are made up of phospholipids and proteins. The proteins are usually involved in signaling from one cell to another. They can bind with a molecule, and a biochemical reaction then takes place, and some kind of chemical information is transmitted. The PFAS compounds appear, to one degree or another, to stick to those signaling proteins. It's kind of like getting spam on your cell phone. When a spam message is coming through, the other messages are blocked. Okay? And what kind of mischief will that cause? Well, the dimensionality there is stunning. You're looking at thousands of different kinds of proteins. You're looking at perhaps hundreds of different PFAS compounds in varying concentrations to which you might be exposed, and different mixtures of them. And so what kinds of mischief might you be looking for? Well, it's an enormous set of combinations. And so the epidemiology, where you step back and look at that issue from a population standpoint, you know, all the people in the Cape Fear River Valley, for example, a couple of 100,000 of us, and you start to look for effects, oh my God, it's like looking for one piece of straw in a pile of straw.
The one that's a slightly different color but can do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
But the one thing worth mentioning also, there's several, because he's throwing a lot of data, which is really good stuff, is that PFOAs and PFOSs and these things also, they're not like, even the confusion with mercury. I mean, you have two different kinds of, you know, you were very good about mentioning that it was methylmercury as opposed to ethyl mercury. You know, because one is much more toxic than the other. The other is largely non-toxic. But people that get into vaccine discussions throw them together as if they're equal compounds. And it's very confusing to folks because one is non-toxic, the other is. And the good news with some of this is that it does leave the body. We forget that our kidneys and our bodies do process things that aren't supposed to be there, except for some types of other. And so these chemicals do leave the body over time. If you cut off the supply of it over time, it leaves, which is good news for most humans.
That's good news. The killer for us has been, for 4 decades, we were drinking and intaking a steady new supply of PFAS compounds until we figured out that we need to get that stuff out of our water.
And the people that worked in it that had much higher levels that were exposed to. Those are some of the long-term studies. Are those people, a few thousand of them that were exposed to it for a decade plus at much higher levels than anyone in our market.
That's right, and different mixtures of them. See, here's another wrinkle. You never get just one compound. You're getting mixtures of them with the compound itself that you're focused on, but also the byproducts. Do they interact with each other in the body? That's an extraordinarily difficult question. Some of them, we think the smaller PFAS molecules are excreted faster from the body compared to the larger ones. Gen X is a little smaller than PFOA. We think that its residence time in the body is shorter than PFOA. But note that people in this region still have very high quantities of PFOA in their bodies long after that stuff stopped being produced. So its residence time in the body is very long. With Gen X, we do not know yet for sure. We've only just started these fairly limited blood supply samples, and it's very, very difficult and very expensive to get the kinds of numbers in a human epidemiological study that are really required to tease out these effects. They are very complex. The more complex the issue, the bigger the sample size you need. So, we're just beginning to get a grip on this stuff. Knowing, however, that the better known compounds, PFOA and PFOS, are very definitely toxic, very definitely cause an array of cancers and other diseases. I think testicular cancer was one of them. It makes me cringe a bit. Kidney damage, liver damage, hypercholesteremia, things like that are all associated with that. And that says to me that, again, the mechanism that we think we know something about, this business of binding with proteins, that would mess up a very complex organ like the liver. That's where you detoxify things, but
right.
That's largely a function of the proteins and the enzymes that you've got working. And if you start messing those things up, the dimensionality of the problems you could potentially cause is huge. So what do you look for? That's the challenge. It's going to take us decades to figure this out.
But the other good news, and again, I agree, I think it is like freedom. You have to always be vigilant. You said it earlier about government agencies. It is this way in epidemiological terms. It's good to always be vigilant. I think one of the things that often gets the mistake is that fear becomes a problem as well. That we throw stuff out there and people are instantly made to be afraid. Their life is over. Their fear, their stress. They're worried about their kids. They're worried about everything else. And when in the absence of fact, fear becomes reality. And like you said, if we're seeing cancer clusters, we're seeing other things. Those are horrible things. And unfortunately, in global scales, we've seen clusters of horrific things, especially near the toxicity near some of the mines for batteries and things like this, the chemicals that go in batteries. Some of those levels are off the chart with respect to kids that are mining that stuff and dangers. And coal mining and black lung disease and emphysema from smoking, which the only known cause is emphysema is smoking. So we see this, and over time, but to put the fear of God in everybody as if their children have been poisoned when we're hopeful, and we should remain vigilant and find out what the truth is, but also be hopeful that our bodies, as we reduce those levels, that over time they go out and they haven't caused damage. We need to also be wary to overly make people afraid, if that makes sense.
Well, I would agree with, not being terrified of things. That usually you don't make good choices when you're terrified, especially when you have very limited information. Let me switch gears here, though, and come at this from a very different angle. For many years, DuPont and then Chemours disposed of their industrial waste into our drinking water supply. They knew that stuff had the potential to be toxic, going back, decades. And they did it because it was cheap. And they basically put any cost of treating their own waste and byproducts onto us, the public, the consumers of that water. And I would argue that is, number one, an abuse of the public. Number two, it's bad economics. It's not free market economics. In free market economics, the true free market economics, all the costs of production are included in the price of the product.
Not part of it.
Including the disposal of chemicals in an appropriate manner.
For free into somebody else's property, their drinking water, their air, onto their actual land that they own, you're basically creating what the economists call an externality. But basically, you're foisting off part of the cost of production onto the unsuspecting public. And we need to put a stop to that. If your waste products are not safe, why should you be allowed to dump them into our drinking water supply?
Which is why that class action lawsuit went forward.
Yeah,
against them for doing. That's true. That's part of the litigious nature of us.
That's for damages.
You assess those
I would
damages.
argue that we need to prevent that altogether. That the standard should be no discharge until you prove that it's safe. Otherwise, you can clean up your own mess. If you can make those things, you can treat them. DuPont had the best chemists in the known universe. They could have figured out how to get rid of those wastes. Matter of fact, they installed a thermal oxidizer unit at Parkersburg back in the early 2000s. They didn't install one at Fayetteville Works until 2019. What was stopping them? The technology was there. They didn't want to spend the money to protect their neighbors.
But we have to spend $30 million to have an additional activated charcoal filter system added to the Sweeney plant just to keep us from getting further poison from what's still there.
Well, wait. You say further poison, but that's to also screen it. It's not just DuPont. It's the nature of everything that's in our water system. I mean, we have drugs. Think about all the drugs that are being flushed into our system. Go through processing, don't get picked up by filtration.
Those compounds can be broken down by the standard treatment methods. The PFAS compounds cannot.
Exactly.
I'm familiar with the pharmaceuticals that they find. They're subclinical levels. The fact that you can find them does not necessarily mean that we can't treat them. We can. The existing Sweeney treatment systems, ultraviolet, ozone oxidation, chlorination, and so forth, do a pretty good job of getting rid of all the microbiological hazards and almost all of the organic chemistry hazards, with the exception of PFAS compounds, which are extremely hard to break down. So that's what got through at us. The pharmaceuticals and other things just aren't making it through. They're being broken down before we drink that water. They're there in the river. Sure. I've seen the numbers. Atrazine from herbicide applications. We find caffeine in the river.
Yep.
We find ibuprofen. But
these compounds can be broken down into inert.
Not everything. That's what I'm saying.
In the
treatment
PFAS,
process. The bad stuff we can't break down,
but
and
the
that's why we're
systems.
pissed.
The charcoal systems are going to become more and more prevalent. That's good news.
But we have to pay for it. Your water bill, my water bill.
Everyone who pays, there's $400 million in fines. Wait, TK, the cost of everything is assumed by everyone. I mean, it's like the student loan. I don't want to get off the student loans and stuff, but the point is that the filtration systems that we're developing and modernizing, that's part of living in a free society, and it isn't going to be free. And it's not just New Hanover County. Everyone's going to be moving to these, not just because of PFAS and because of DuPont, who also is still facing dozens of lawsuits and hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. Their criminal investigation still ongoing right now against DuPont.
Actually, the indictment was dropped.
Well, not all of them. It's still winding through the courts. This isn't over by a long shot. And not to mention 3M, which is also another company that has got the same problem that DuPont have. Even though he stopped 10 years ago, that's the nature of litigation. That's the good news. And companies do get punished, and they should be. That's
how we end up with a Superfund site, isn't it, Dr. Cahoon?
Yeah. My problem, again, is with the philosophy that says, well, let them make their mess, and then if we catch them, and if we demonstrate that they actually harmed us, past tense, then we'll make them pay for it. That's
but
a
the
pretty
they is
sloppy
always
way to
us.
do business.
It is, and the they
I
is
would
always
argue that
us.
That sounds like socialism to me, where we have to pay for the polluter's damages. That's not free market to me. A free market is where you clean up your own mess and you keep your crap off of my property. And I shouldn't
And so
have
New
to pay
Hanover
to clean up your
government,
mess.
let's not forget, don't forget, New Hanover operated an incinerator for years that did not scrub things clearly and was linked to pollution all throughout the entire region, dumping stuff into the air and other places. So there's no one without some blood on their hands here. And socialism is if the government took over the company and ran and operated the company. The government is suing these companies. Are there class action lawsuits against them?
Yeah, I would argue that the government allowed them to do it.
Yeah. You could make
I
that
don't know
argument.
if the government is suing them. I think the individual
I would argue
lawsuits.
that we should not allow potentially toxic discharges into our drinking water supply or into the air we breathe or to be deposited on our land so it poisons our wells. That's just wrong. That's just
no, I don't think anyone would disagree with that.
Yeah, and the whole principle that you should clean up your mess before it becomes somebody else's mess to me is a very simple one. And we should apply that. And, if we haven't learned anything from decades and decades of environmental litigation and regulation, it's that cleaning up messes after the fact is always more expensive and always punishes the victims instead of the perpetrators. The perps get away. The shareholders have made a fortune. The employees have been paid, et cetera, and they walk away. The Superfund is all about using taxpayer money to clean up messes from companies or outfits that are no longer financially responsible for the mess they made. Again, it socializes the costs and privatizes the profits.
And that's sort of what we're trying to put a break to, is that if it's a bad idea, it should be, the regulation is always set after the damage.
Yeah, that's right. It's always reactive. Oh, we'll fix this later, after people have died, after people have experienced fear, as you say. There's a legitimate basis for that fear. I'd argue that it can go overboard, as fear often does, but how much do we not know about the effects of PFAS on us and our environment? I'd argue a hell of a lot. What we do
and Doc, you would also say that over time, here's another aspect. We had lead in our fuels in the 70s. We have cleaner air and cleaner water, arguably today, than we did 50 years ago because of knowledge and testing and more and more. And the technology used to make air better and water cleaner continues to evolve and become better as well, because the complexity of things that are in our environment changes. So too the need to try to keep it clean. It isn't a vacuum.
True. However, think about why we banned leaded gasoline, because lead is a toxin, right? And we didn't ban it just because it might potentially pose a risk. We banned it because it did. And what we know is that folks who lived close to major motorways and were exposed to the fumes from leaded gasoline had elevated lead in their bloodstreams. And that elevated lead in children and fetuses caused brain damage.
Yep.
That brain damage doesn't get better. So we went through a period of decades of inflicting brain damage on some portion of the population. And how does that brain damage show up in society? Aside from the individual consequences, we're still paying for that. Those brain damaged people are still out there. When you look at blood lead levels historically, some of them are shocking, especially in inner city areas where there's heavy traffic and lots of exposure to fumes. And what effects does brain damage have on an individual? That's one thing, but what does it do to society when we have to cope with those individuals? The fact that we cleaned it up is a good thing. The fact that we let it happen for so long is not so good. My argument is we need to be a lot more proactive about exposing the population to toxins in our environment, especially when we have the means to prevent that.
Known toxins and versus, I mean, that's the thing. And again, I sound like I'm defending, and I'm not. I think that everybody involved in any kind of, no, never would. I mean, it's like when I watched the Monsanto case with the Roundup, I was fascinated by the jury in that case. Nowhere in that case did they ever prove there was a medical link between it. Nowhere in that case. But there was a sympathetic individual who suffered from cancer that the jury awarded, because Monsanto's a horrible company that everyone hates, that has money, that has increased crop production around the planet. And so they lost not on the science, they lost on opinion. And that became the basis for every lawsuit against Monsanto since. And yet Roundup is still sold, by the way. You can go down to Walmart and buy it.
Sure it is.
So those are the kind of things when we look at things, we have to have a balanced approach. I completely concur. Anyone, I mean, look at Love Canal. Even the Love Canal case, when you look back at it now, is very different. The 3 Mile Island case, living near nuclear facilities. Remember, we were all going to die. Our hair was going to fall out. We were all going to get cancer. And here you and I are in the shadow of Brunswick nuclear plant. Nuclear plants are completely safe. It's now considered a green energy production. So there's never a time in human existence when toxins aren't
You brought a lot of different things onto the table. I chaired our radiation safety committee for about 12 years, and so I'm fully aware of the hype about radiation. I used to tell the committee every time we met, our job as an oversight committee is to make sure that UNCW stays out of the news with regard to this, because there is no upside to anything about radioactivity. Never mind that the risks are vanishingly small. We know that. It's the public perception of it.
Yes.
We use the term radioactive to describe situations and people that no one wants to touch, right? And that came out of, the nuclear testing that went on in the 60s and back into the 50s, where we were exposed. Probably not lethally in any major way, but there was a lot of exposure, and we stopped it. But again, it was reactive. It was like, oh, shit, we found out that mother's milk had strontium-90 in it. Never mind, it was probably not all that dangerous in the doses.
But it was there.
But it was there.
Yeah, but it was there. We can find some of these things with exquisite sensitivity. The question is, what is the risk from a given level?
And that's going to vary from person to person.
Time perceiving that. Coming back to Roundup, the active ingredient is glyphosate. And, every time you hear about a chemical, almost immediately you start thinking, oh, I wonder if it causes cancer. Like dihydrogen oxide.
Well said.
But one of the things we do know is that glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. It's an estrogen mimic. And more and more of what we're learning is that very, very small quantities of that stuff to women who are vulnerable to breast cancer, apparently it is a risk factor for that. And, again, the science, as you cite, the science may have gone way past the jury. Matter of fact, they may not have had all the science that we have now. But that's one of the, any attorney will tell you, when you put a case in front of a jury, you really never know what's going to happen. And I've been an expert witness in a few trials, and now and then you can see, the jury's leaning one way or the other based on what they're hearing. But it's a crapshoot. Any attorney who says, oh, yeah, we'll go to a jury and we'll win is bullshitting you. Okay. Oh, I shouldn't say that on the air, right?
No, you can say it.
You're on the Asylum, man. It's safe.
You can say it online.
That's right. Yeah.
We're not governed by the FCC here, or the.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Well, I'll try and keep it clean. But my point is that when you go to a jury trial, it's a roll of the dice, and quite often you see cases like these settled before you get to a jury. as you said, Chad, juries tend to hate big corporations that are filthy rich.
And chemicals.
They hate chemicals.
Put those
and
two together, and it's
in some ways, I'm a little surprised that Monsanto chose to go all the way through a jury trial. But I'm not an attorney. I can't second guess their attorneys. They rolled the dice and they lost. Sometimes the strict facts and the most correct interpretation of those facts is not what gets through to a jury. Sympathetic.
Well, we're way over time, but I want to ask you one. Wait. I want to ask you one question that's germane, because now we're being inundated by lawyer ads on Camp Lejeune.
Right.
Inundated. I mean, it online, on TV, everywhere.
Well,
you can't escape that there was bad. Exactly.
Yep.
And so, how would you state the actual toxicity problems at Camp Lejeune through that period of time? We know those were folks, it's a horrible thing, anyone who suffered. How would you say it? Because you're not a lawyer, you're not a jury, but you're a scientist.
The compounds in question were what they call perc and trike, perchloroethylene and trichloroethylene. They're commonly used solvents. They were used by dry cleaners for many years. They're used in degreasing formulas. They did a lot of engine maintenance and repair on the base. And the military's disposal practices were appalling. They dumped that stuff out on the ground. Those two compounds are well-known carcinogens. Chlorinated hydrocarbons in general are all carcinogens. Every one we've ever tested will do that job. I remember my organic chemistry professor 50 years ago telling us halogenated hydrocarbons are carcinogens, period. And that covers PFAS, too, which we didn't know about then. So those are well-established carcinogens. And, again, the epidemiology, they have looked at the incidence of these different diseases among the people exposed on the base. And there were at least 250,000 directly exposed. And probably, given that people rotated through, including families, probably on the order of 1 million. And they have excellent evidence that there were indeed health effects. So what the attorneys are doing is advertising to solicit folks who may have been exposed and who may have developed any or all, any of these diseases. There's federal money there as a settlement because it's the federal government's fault that this happened. It was the military. And so there are billions of dollars in settlement. But again, you're paying people after the fact for all the harm they suffered.
Right.
I know a couple of those people, and it's appalling. There's no amount of money that compensates you for what was done. And it was done very callously. The military denied for many years that these people were exposed. They knew for 5 or 6 years that the well water was seriously contaminated, and they did nothing. They denied it for years. They covered it up. So there's an element of punishment here and rectification for the victims.
There will be. And to TK's point earlier, that's not a company. That's the U.S. government.
Well, that's right. And the military.
You say the military. We're talking about our government. So when we punish our government, you and I pay for that. So that
that's right. That's right. The
and
same
unfortunately, we live.
Apply. You make a mess, you clean it up. And
you're right.
We tasked the military with doing something different than generating products. But we still have to instill an ethos in them. Okay, look, we're not about to go under, and be swarmed over by the communist hordes. We have the time, the technology, and the resources to clean up these messes before they kill the people we're trying to protect.
Again, it was the cover-up. As soon as it became known, and they came forward, and that would have been very different. It's one thing when prior knowledge isn't available and something goes wrong. It's another entirely when prior knowledge doesn't exist and something goes wrong.
As they've said all along, the cover-up is what kills you.
Yes.
When you admit fault up front, say, we screwed up.
And then make it right. And then do whatever it takes to make it right.
Right. That's
within
rare. People don't want to pay for it.
Paying is against profits.
Yeah, and even with the military.
Yeah, but long term, that's the opposite, TK. Companies that want to stay in business do well when they evolve and do that because patrons and customers reward companies that are responsible over time.
They should.
They do.
Well, they should, but Chemours was dumping stuff as recent as, 4 years ago?
Well, Chemours was a spinoff. That was DuPont trying to escape liability and spinning off Chemours.
Again, that's exactly the point. We don't want them to avoid.
DuPont created a liability zombie. They sent it out walking around and bumping into things, and it finally did. But they're still making good money. Chemours is very profitable.
The CEO made $10 million in a bonus last year, while we are paying $30 million to clean up our water.
But wait a minute. And part of that is because he's handling the public relations side of things. And these lawsuits aren't going away. They're not going away anytime soon.
But the longer they're delayed, the more money he makes in a bonus.
But was he the one that caused the problem, or is he the one trying to clean it up?
He's not trying to clean it up.
You don't know that he's not doing that.
He's not trying to clean it up. He's trying to snow us with this.
They're spending millions right now with their 1 mile long wall trying to. Whether you like it or not, make fun of it or not.
They haven't built anything yet.
Right, they haven't built anything, and that cistern does not have any chance of being effective.
But again, let me ask you this, TK. Are we better served with them going out of business and nobody being compensated, or them being successful and finding a way to compensate? Because I would argue it's in our best interest for them to fix it and stay in business.
We have no path to either solution, however.
Because if we're gonna demonize every company that's done anything wrong, we're not going to have any companies left, and we're going to be living like cave people. So we have to be real
I'm good
careful.
with that.
No, you're not, because you wouldn't function because we wouldn't.
I know how to make electricity in the real world. I'm good with that.
Right.
No electricity though.
All I need to do is spin a magnet and a coil of water or wire, and I've got all the electricity I want.
Right.
We just have to be real careful about.
Well, I think there's a happy middle ground here. I think responsible companies, as you say, will choose to do the right thing, whether it's because they fear the consequences of doing it wrong or because they realize that it's good customer relations.
Because your customers dead don't buy stuff.
Yeah. You also have competition out there, ideally, and if the competitors can say, we do a better job of cleaning up our crap than so-and-so, and you can be assured that we're better neighbors than they are, that's going to help. And companies are going to produce stuff either here or somewhere else. And, we've been through this macroeconomic thing where companies locate to countries that don't give a damn about what happens to their own people. That was actually a sabotage. Bhopal was a sabotage act by a disgruntled worker. It was an inside job. Yeah.
Right.
It was not an accident.
And read Michael Crichton's summary of that. I mean, Michael Crichton did some extensive writing about both Bhopal and Chernobyl. Great writing.
I have a hard time trusting Michael Crichton because he has an axe or had an axe to grind. He's dead now.
Yes.
He went to medical school.
Yeah, he was a doctor. Well, he went to medical school.
He didn't practice, but when you read his stuff, there's always a bit of an axe to grind in there. And so, I've never quite believed that he was anything but a fiction writer. He's not a reporter.
Well, his Yellowstone, his essay on Yellowstone's history is fantastic, and he's written some nonfiction, wrote, I should say.
Yeah.
In addition to Andromeda and Westworld and those kind of things that were way ahead of their time.
Right. Well, he's well known for the science fiction stuff he wrote, but
Jurassic Park, fiction based in science, but in fiction nonetheless.
Sort of, but always with kind of an edge. The bad things that could happen.
State of Fear book is one of those. But anyway, TK, I've got to run because I got a store to open. But thank you, Doc, for what you, Dr. Cahoon. Thank you for what you do.
It's amazing material. I mean, that's why we have you on the show. Because I need somebody smarter than myself and certainly smarter than Chad to help unlock a lot of this. And of course, I am not quite the devil's advocate in training as other people are. Because I'm more concerned about, I'm still pissed that we couldn't return an indictment Because if we had a criminal conviction or at least an indictment, the civil wouldn't be near the pain in the butt it is to get through the court system, and this would already be done. Right?
Possibly.
Or at least it would certainly accelerate the process. We wouldn't be waiting.
Yeah. Again, I know they had a grand jury. The Eastern District, the federal guys convened a grand jury. Nothing ever came of that. I was a little surprised because, the famous line from any DA is, "I could indict a ham sandwich."
Right.
And so you wonder, what level of criminal culpability did they really need to establish before they went and asked for an indictment? Or did the grand jury say, "There's nothing here"? I don't know. I mean, all those proceedings are secret, so it's impossible to know what happened. And I assume that when they said they convened a grand jury, that they weren't lying about that. But you'd never know. I mean, how would you verify that the grand jury even met? I don't know. Given that the proceedings are all secret, the members of the grand jury are secret. The presentations made to them are all secret. All
the money is
information.
Secret.
Yeah.
Man.
Presumably, there may be actions by the civil attorneys, the guys in the civil cases, to try and get whatever information, whatever evidence there was that might have been presented to the grand jury. I don't know the law when it comes to that. I just don't. So.
Well, I'm glad that you're one of the smart people that helps me understand what it is I'm about to put into my coffee. I'll just start there. I'm glad that I haven't been here long enough to accrue any massive amounts so far.
There you go.
So,
it's a lot better now than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The numbers have come way down.
And the costs have gone way up.
Yeah, and they're going to keep going up. I mean, we're going to get a rate boost soon.
Man.
That GAC system should be online, I think, in October. They're testing it now. So.
And we're the experimenters. I'm kidding.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they're testing it as in the results of the water.
Yeah,
in a
they
lab.
Want to make sure that it works as advertised because, they're scaling up.
And even if it doesn't work, it's not going to make it worse.
Right.
Right,
Oh,
so we're
right.
still
No,
drinking.
It'll be better, definitely.
In some regard, whether it's 2% or 200%, it'll be a little better, at least, than what we have.
They should have pretty much everything down to below detection limits. And the detection limits are getting lower, so I'm hopeful that, we'll essentially have as close to zero as you can get.
So you're going to tell me my coffee is no longer going to taste like the inside of a penny?
No, that's something else.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what your water is coming from, but yeah.
Well, there's some metallic flavor in there, that little bit of a biting tang. When I add water to it, it smokes a little bit.
Maybe switch brands of coffee. Who knows where that stuff comes from? It's all ground up brown stuff, right?
Yeah, the chock full of nuts, which was, I did not know this until I was well into my adulthood, does not have a bit of coffee in it. It's like tree bark and twigs.
Right. I mean, how would you know? An awful lot of stuff, ground up looks like coffee grounds, right?
And with enough cream, sugar, and hot water, we're fine.
Yeah, you'd not really know the difference. If it tastes even close, you're like, yeah, good enough. I mean, people talk about being connoisseurs of coffee, but let's face it. Most of us are drinking it for the caffeine, and
we're drug
the taste
addicts.
is only the secondary attributes don't matter. We're like, okay, I got my slug of caffeine. I'm good. I'm there. Yeah. So I got a person waiting outside my office.
Well, sir, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a wonderful day. And with that in mind, you go take care of students. I'm going to take care of a radio station.
All right.
See you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been an extended version of the Asylum, your refuge in a world gone mad, right here on the Big Talker Network. Please tune in tomorrow for more. Wonderful conversations with smart people right here on the Big Talker Network. See you then. You're tuned in to the Big Talker Network, Wilmington, North Carolina's premier internet station for news and talk radio programming. Find us online at bigtalker.live.